Okay, today's daf we're going to be learning is Pesachim, daf Ayin Aleph. This week of learning is sponsored by Medina Korn in honor of the 30th anniversary of her mother, Rosalie Landsman Katchen's first liver transplant. During the 10 years of life she was granted, she shared much Torah wisdom and love with us all, and we are forever grateful. And by Tov and David Kestenbaum in honor of their uncle, Reuven Bolka Harav, Reuven Pinchas Ben Yehudit. May Hashem grant him refuah shlema so we can continue spreading Torah and Chesed throughout the world and inspiring all of us. But those are both week long of dedications, and today's daf is sponsored by Sherry Begner to mark the 25th yahrzeit of her father, Professor Marvin Fox, Harav Moshe Zev Ben Nechemia V'Shifra Zichrono Livracha. My father devoted his life to Torah learning, academia, and building Jewish communal institutions. May his memory be for a blessing. And by Betsy and Tevi Melman in memory of Mark Jacoby, Mordechai, Yochanan Ben, David, and Leah, who passed away on Tu B'Shvat. A Holocaust survivor, Mark Jacoby was a living role model of commitment to the Jewish faith. Those who were privileged to know him could not help but admire his dedication to the Jewish people, his determination and tenacity in learning Torah, and above all, his kindly, good-natured demeanor. May his memory be blessed. We're going to get started at the bottom of Ayin Amud Bet. I'll give you a little bit of the structure of the first part of today's daf. Ula is going to make a statement in the name of Rabbi Elazar. They're going to try to bring strength in that position. Then they're going to bring two questions against it. All attempts are going to be rejected. Both the attempt to prove is going to be rejected. The two attempts to question are also going to be knocked out. And then we're going to bring actually, am I right that the second one's knocked out? No, 1 second. Yeah, they're all answered. And then we're going to have a different version of what Rabbi Elazar said. So after we bring what Ula thinks Rabbi Elazar said, and we brought all those questions and possible proofs, then we're going to have a different version in the name of Ravin of what Rabbi Elazar said. I want to remind you all, Rabbi Elazar was an Emorah from Eretz Israel, and Ula and Ravin are both people who went back and forth, and they brought the Torah of Israel to Babylonia. So Ravin had a different version, and then we're going to bring a question on that version, which is the same source that we use to try to prove the opposite opinion, but we're going to reject it the same way that we rejected it as a proof. We also are going to reject it here as a question. That's going to be the whole first section of today's daf. So Amar Ula Amar Rabbi Elazar. Shlamim sheshachatan me'erev Yom Tov. Remember we talked about we're in the middle of the topic of there's this chagiga that we bring on the 14th. There's chagigot that we bring on the 15th and throughout the entire holiday. Those are different and maybe possibly have different rules, right? There's different opinions. Remember, Ben Tema says the chagiga that we bring on Yud Dalet has all the same rules as the Korban Pesach, whereas the Tana of our Mishnah thought it has all the same rules as a regular chagiga. And then we talked about Shalmei Simcha, which is in order to be happy on Yom Tov. One of the ways we're happy is by eating meat. And because of that, the people, when they were in Jerusalem, they would bring sacrifices that were shlamim, where you get to eat most of the meat. And then they would eat that as their Simchat Yom Tov. So now what if we have shlamim? We have a regular korban shlamim that we sacrificed on Yud Dalet. Okay, randomly we sacrificed it on Yud Dalet. And then we didn't eat it, and we eat it the next day, or at least some of it's left over to eat the next day. So when you eat that meat the next day, now remember, what did we say? There's sacrifices you bring the next day, like the Shalmei Simcha and the Shalmei Chagiga. So maybe when you eat that meat that you sacrificed on Yud Dalet, when it wasn't the holiday, the question is, can you say, while I'm eating that, I'm yotzei the mitzvah of eating Shalmei Simcha or Shalmei Chagiga, which is meat that was sacrificed. This is also meat that was sacrificed. It just happens it was sacrificed on a weekday, right, on the Erev holiday of the holiday and not on the holiday itself. So comes Rabbi Elazar, or Ula in the name of Rabbi Elazar, and he says, if you slaughtered these yesterday, Eino yotzei behem lo mishum simcha v'lo mishum chagiga. You cannot, because each one has unique laws that preclude this from being used. What is that? Mishum simcha dechtiv v'zavachta v'samachta. It says you should slaughter and rejoice. So what does he say? Be'inan zvicha b'shat simcha v'leika. Because those two words appear juxtaposed in the verse, they say it has to be shchita when you're obligated in simcha. You slaughtered this yesterday when you didn't even have an obligation of simcha upon you. So no. Mishum chagiga, different reason. Dehave davar shebechova. A chagiga was obligatory. The Shalmei Simcha were not obligatory. They were extras. But chagiga, on the holiday, you had to bring a korban chagiga. So if it's a chova, there's a rule about things that are obligatory. Kol davar shebechova, eino ba ela min achulin. You can't take something that was already sanctified and use it for your korban that was obligatory. You have to take an animal that wasn't sanctified at all and then put upon its sanctity for this sacrifice. In this case, what happened? It was already sanctified because it was a shlamim yesterday. Yesterday, you said this is for a korban shlamim and you slaughtered it. So it's already sanctified. So you can't move sanctity from one thing to another when it comes to an obligatory offering. You can only take something that's 100% not sanctified and turn it into a sanctified for your sacrifice. So that's why chagiga can't. Okay, so those are the two reasons we have. And now we're going to move to our second part, which is, like I said, first we'll try to prove it from a braita, because again, he's an emora. We're going to say if you can bring a braita to support, even better. And then we're going to bring two questions from Tanaitic sources that seem to disagree with him. Lema Meseyale. Let us suggest that this source could provide a proof. V'hayita ach sameach, very famous pasuk, right? We always sing it on Yantiv, people who sing. So, right, one of the Zmirot. V'hayita ach sameach. So you should be happy, but the word ach always comes to kind of say something a little bit different. So let's see. What do they say here? The ach is lerabot lele yom tov ha'acharon l'simcha. It's to teach you that you can eat the simcha, the korbanot, shalmei simcha, also on the night of Shmini Atzeret. Now, they say, wait a minute, the classic Midrash Halacha style, Ata omer lele yom tov ha'acharon oenu lele yom tov harishon. Which night are we adding? Now, what's the issue here? The issue is that normally you sacrifice the korbanot simcha during the day. Remember, no sacrifices were brought at night. So you sacrifice it during the day and you eat it at night. Now, Shmini Atzeret, right? If you sacrifice them during the day, it's Sukkot. When you sacrifice it at night, it's a different holiday called Shmini Atzeret. So can you be Yotze, right, with sacrificing during the day when it's not the same holiday? Okay, we all can connect them, but they're really two separate holidays. So this pasuk comes to teach you, yes, ach sameach comes to add that you can sacrifice them on day number 7 of Sukkot and eat them on the 8th day on Shmini Atzeret. Okay, and be Yotze Shalmei Simcha, but not what? Not the first night of Yom Tov, because the first night of Yom Tov, when are you going to sacrifice them? You're going to sacrifice them on Erev Yom Tov. What does this seem to prove? Why can't you sacrifice them on Erev Yom Tov? And the whole thing is, why did you include Shmini Atzeret, but not include the 15th, right? The first day, the first night. So they say, right? Maybe it's to include also Leilei Yom Tov Rishon. So they say, Talmud Lomar ach chilek. Ach comes to say, not this. Yes, something, but not something else. Okay, so now my timer, what's the reason? It must be exactly for the reason that Ula said, which is, Lav mishum de'ein lo b'mei yismach. What on earth could you sacrifice? You can't sacrifice Shalmei Simcha because you can't sacrifice Shalmei Simcha on your Dalet and eat them on Tevav, right? Tevav is the first day of the holiday, the 15th. You can't do that because that's exactly what Ula said. That must be why. Whereas when you're coming to Shmini Atzeret, you can sacrifice them on the 7th day of Sukkot because you're in the middle of a holiday. A holiday, you're allowed to sacrifice. So there you have it. It works, okay? It works there. It doesn't work here. That proves Ula that it can't be done on the 14th. So they say, lo, that's not the reason why. And in fact, we'll prove it's not the reason why. Kidatane Tama, because there's a braita that explains the reason. There it explains it. It says, they asked exactly our question. Why include Shmini Atzeret and exclude first night? Marbani lele yom tov ha'acharon sheyesh simcha lefanav. Umotzi ani lele yom tov rishon she'ein simcha lefanav. If you're going to talk about having an obligation for these simcha, we're going to say not because you can't sacrifice on your Dalet, maybe you can and eat it on Tevav and be Yotze Shalmei Simcha against what Ula said. The issue is if we're going to have to include one and exclude the other, which one are you already, in the 8th day, you're already been involved in simcha all week, so you just continue the celebration and eat them. The first night, you're just starting. So maybe if we're going to have to exclude one, we prefer to exclude that one because it doesn't have simcha before. You're not already involved in eating Shalmei Simcha. Once you get to day number 8, right, you're in the middle of eating it, so continue eating them that night. So therefore, we do it, nothing having to do with our topic about whether or not, theoretically, maybe you could sacrifice on your Dalet and eat Tevav, but since the pasuk limits something, it has to limit, we have to choose which one it's going to limit. Let's choose that one because there was no obligation of Simcha beforehand. Okay, so that was our attempt to prove it fell flat. Now we're going to have two sources that contradict. Mativ Rav Yosef, and this is going to be a source we saw yesterday's daf. But first they're going to understand it a little differently than we understood it yesterday. And then they're going to come to understand it the way we understood it yesterday. So it might confuse you a little at first because we're going to read this in a way that we didn't read it yesterday. Chagigat arba asar, yotze ba mishum simcha, ve'en yotze ba mishum chagiga. Yesterday, what we explained, just so that I keep you clear on what we learned so that you don't get too confused. Yesterday, we said this means if you designate a sacrifice for the Chagiga of your Dalit and you don't sacrifice it on your Dalit, you don't need it, let's say you have enough meat, then the next day you want to sacrifice it, you would have thought it could work as a Chagigat Tevav. It can't, okay? But it can work. It can be morphed into a Korban Shalmei Simcha. So that's the way we understood it. But now what they're saying is they think that this means Chagigat Arba'a Asar Yotzei ba mishum Simcha ve'ein yotzei ba mishum Chagiga. They think it means if you slaughtered it yesterday as your Dalit and you have meat left over, when you eat this meat the following day, you can be Yotzei Simcha, but you can't be Yotzei Chagiga. So, Amai, can this work according to what Ula said? If I sacrificed it on your Dalit and I'm eating it on Tevav to be Yotzei my laws of Simcha, it can't possibly be. What did he say? You have to slaughter it the same day that you rejoice with it and eat it. And here, that's not what happened. So Amar Rav Idi Bar Av, and he's now going to explain it the way we explained it yesterday, which is she'ikev u'shachata. It's not that you slaughtered it yesterday as a chagiga. It's that you designated it as a chagiga, but you never used it. And now for tomorrow, what can you use it for? Well, you can't use it for chagigat tevav. You can only use it for shalmei simcha. Okay? And then it has nothing to do with Ula, because Ula was talking about when we sacrificed it the day before. And this, in the end, is going to be sacrificed on Tevav and eaten on Tevav, and therefore could even be eaten on the next day because it's a Shlamim. Anyway, that's not the issue. Although I guess it's saying that you have to actually, to be Yotzei Simcha, you'd have to eat it on the same day. Okay, so or at least I think it means you have to have potential, because that's actually, I just realized that this a little bit contradicts, because Shalmei Simcha, you can actually eat for 2 days and a night. So you could eat it the next day, but I think the point is, it has to be done on a day where you could potentially eat it, even if you don't necessarily eat it. You could leave it another day, but it has to be done on Tevav, Tetzayin, Yud Zayin, but not in your Dalit, since you can't even eat it on your Dalit. It has to be slaughtered at a time when you can at least potentially eat it. Now, Rav Ashi is going to prove that it's for sure that this is the right way to read that source. How do we know? And this goes back to what we learned in yesterday's daf. Amar Rav Ashi, hachinami mistabra. It's also much more logical to explain that that's talking about a chagiga that wasn't slaughtered on your dalid, that was designated to be slaughtered, but only got slaughtered the next day. That will work for your shlamim, your shalmei simcha. Why? De'ilo temahachi hamatnita man katanela. If you don't say that, well, remember who this Braita was said in the name of. This was in the middle of the Braita Ben Tema. Okay, Ben Tema. Ben Tema, what did Ben Tema say? Remember, he said, Chagigat Yudalit has all the same laws as the Korban Pesach. So let's try to fill in the way we tried to explain this a few minutes ago. What did we say? You slaughtered it on your Dalit and only ate it on Tevav. Well, you're not allowed to do that, because what does he say? It can only be eaten that night. So there would be no option of slaughtering it today and eating it the next day. And that's why obviously it means that you never slaughtered the animal on your dalit. You designated it, but you ended up only slaughtering it tomorrow. So that's what we're going to see right now. Ha pasa lebelina. Remember, it's puzzle by sleeping, right? Lina means literally sleeping, but what it means is leaving it overnight. If you left it overnight, already by the next morning, it's disqualified. So there's no way that that's what it could be referring to, and therefore this has nothing to do with Ula, and it doesn't raise a question, because it's not a case where you slaughtered it and then ate it the next day, which would go against Ula. Next question. This is going to be from a Mishnah in Masechet Sukkah. Mativ Rava, Hahalel v'hasimcha shmona. When it comes to Sukkot, we have Hallel, we say for 8 days, again, because you have all the 7 days of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret, the last day, Vehasimcha, and rejoicing, these holiday sacrifices, right? We assume when it says Simcha, it means Simchat HaChag, which means these sacrifices that we bring. Now, those are eaten for 8 days. So now, Iyamarit be'inan zvicha b'shat Simcha, sometimes you'll only be able to eat for 7 days. Why? What would be an example? Like this year that happened, what would it be? Yom Tov Rishon happens on Shabbat. The first day of Sukkot happens on Shabbat. Now, Shalmei Simcha are voluntary offerings. That means voluntary offering, can't sacrifice them on Shabbat. So if the first day of Sukkot, like it came out this year, would be on Shabbat, you're not allowed to bring Shalmei Simcha on Shabbat, which means how many days do you eat? 7 days. Right? Why can you eat the last day on Shmini Atzeret when it's Shabbat? Because you can eat ones that you slaughtered on the 7th day. That's okay. But here, you can't eat right? On the first day, because you'd have to have slaughtered them before Shabbat, which would be Erev, and you can't do that. So if, according to Ula, you're right, then it should have said, Halel v'simcha shmona, and sometimes simcha is only shiv'ah, and it doesn't say that. So, Amar Rav Huna Bered Rav Yoshua, we're going to have two different answers to this question. The first one we're going to reject. The second one will be a good answer. Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says, Misamcho b'seirei harigalim. Wait a minute. There's other ways you can fulfill simcha. How can you fulfill simcha with meat, with sacrificial meat? Same, right? You can still do it in the same kind of way. Sacrificial meat, but not shalmei simcha. You can take obligatory offerings. So what's an obligatory offering? Now the korban tamid and the musafim get all burnt. But there's also the se'irizim l'chatat that you bring on the holidays. Okay, we'll learn all about that further on, why you bring a se'irizim l'chatat. Sin offering, what do you need a sin offering on all the holidays? We'll explain that much later on in Shas. But right now, just take it as a given that we bring a se'irizim l'chatat. Okay, you say it in mincha, musaf of every holiday. So the se'irizim l'chatat. Now, what do you remember about a chatat? Okay, let's go back to our intro to the 5th chapter when we talked about all the sacrifices. A sin offering, who eats it? The Kohanim. I see, Gita, you're on it. So we'll get to that. That's obviously going to be one of the questions. Only the Kohanim eat it, not everybody else. But first, I have a different question. So Amar Rava, shtei tshuva b'davar. Rava says, I have two issues with what you just said. Number one, se'irei harigalim. Okay, this maybe you didn't know. Chai ne'echalim, tzali ein ne'echalim. When you bring the se'irizim l'chatat on Shabbat, the meat doesn't get roasted. Okay, it gets eaten raw. Because why? Because you don't have to eat the meat right now. You can eat it after Shabbat. So you can roast it when Shabbat's over and eat it that night. Had to be eaten that night, but at least you could eat it at night. So that didn't override Shabbat. So if you would eat it raw. So who cares? So you'd eat it raw. Now you might be thinking raw meat, who eats raw meat? And in fact, the Gemara is going to say, B'simcha b'chai leika. There is no such thing as simcha chag. When we talk about eating meat, we're talking about cooked meat, not raw meat. Okay, raw meat is not so tasty, and that's not Simchat Yom Tov. So therefore, number one, there's no way to eat this meat in a way that you'll fulfill Simchat Yom Tov. Number two, even if somehow you would say there was, Kohanim ochlim b'Yisrael b'mes mechim. This only covers your Kohanim being happy. What about 90%? Again, I don't know the exact percentages, but let's just throw it out there. Let's say 90% of your population isn't eating Simcha. So that seems weird that they would say Simcha b'shmona, for Shmona for 8 days, when it's really only 7 days, some years, and only for some people. It would be weird. So, only some people get Simcha for 8 days in certain years. So, seems strange. So therefore, we're going to give a better answer. Okay, this is for all your vegetarian and vegans out there. There's ways to fulfill eating with happiness on Yom Tov without eating meat. So when it says Simcha b'shmona, you can fulfill happiness on Yom Tov with wine, good wine, and with clothing, nice clothing. Okay, I was thinking about this, right? I don't know what goes on in your house during Corona, but sometimes we have kids who never leave the house, right? And they don't really want to get dressed in Shabbos clothes, right? So you have this issue. This is part of, right, when it comes to Chag, it's Simcha. And you might say the same thing when it comes to Shabbat, right? That there's this issue of oneg and you're supposed to wear different clothes. And right, this becomes an issue sometimes in houses about, trying to get dressed for Shabbat, even though you're not really actually leaving the house. So anyway, that was some relevant information here. So, Ki'ata Ravin Amar Rabbi Elazar. Now that was all Rabbi Elazar according to Ula. But now Ravin comes and Ravin says, I've got a different explanation of Rava. So remember, according to, let's just go back. Ula said, if you bring these shlamim that you slaughtered yesterday, okay, on Erev Chag, you can't be Yotze, Simcha, or Chagiga. Comes Ravin and he says, Amar Rabbi Elazar. No, I have a different version of what he said. Shlamim sheshchatam me'erev Yom Tov, Yotze behem mishum Simcha, ve'ein Yotze behem mishum Chagiga. He says, no, you actually can use these for Simcha. Not for Chagiga, but yes for Simcha. Why? So he says, he basically says, I don't hold by that drasha. There's no issue of has to be slaughtered in the time. No, slaughter it today, have it ready for tomorrow, just like we prepare lots of other things on Shabbat, before Shabbat, and eat it the next day. But Chagiga doesn't work for the same reason as before, because it's obligatory. You can't take something that was designated as a shlamim yesterday and turn it into a shalmei chagiga, right? Give it a different type of shlamim offering. Can't do that. Has to be something that you took that wasn't sanctified at all It's not an issue of changing it. It's just an issue that you have to take something that wasn't sanctified at all and turn it into being sanctified. So now what are we going to obviously do? Bring what we brought as a proof for Ula, bring it as a contradiction for this version. Meitive. So Meitive again opens a Braita or a Mishnah that contradicts an Emora. Right? So again, that means the last day you can eat korbanot of simcha. Why wouldn't you say that includes even on the first night you can eat shamei simcha? And according to him, what did he say? You can, because you can slaughter them on the 14th and eat them on the 15th. So Talmud Lamar, ach chilek, right? That ach comes to designate it and limit something. So my time, so again, the Gemara says, why not? Isn't it because lav mishum de'en lo b'mei yismach? Because he doesn't have anything. He can't sacrifice them yesterday on the 14th. And that would go against what Ravin says. So again, just like they said before, lo chidetan, it's because it says in the Braita, and they give the exact reason as to why they included one and not the other, and it had nothing to do with our topic. These sugyot are always fun, especially for Daf Yomi, because you're just repeating what you did. It's the exact same thing we learned. We're now repeating it, but mirror image, because now we're using it as it's not going to contradict this, because we can explain it this way as opposed to before. It's not going to support the other opinion. So marbani le'layom tava acharon sheyesh simcha lefanav u'motziani le'layom tava rishon she'ein simcha lefanav. Right. The reason to include Shmini Atzeret is because you're already in the mode of simcha. If we're going to exclude something, well, exclude the first night where you haven't even yet eaten. This, by the way, is interesting in light of, I was just thinking that on, we're always more careful to eat the first night in the sukkah, right? There's more of a mitzvah the first night. So it's interesting that Dafka with simcha and this meat that they ate from the sacrificial meat, it was less of an issue on the first night. But again, it makes sense because they were part of these sacrifices that were brought during the holiday itself, which again, because you don't bring sacrifices at night, you don't really have an opportunity to do this, right? Pesach is a whole unique thing because you're eating something at night that you sacrificed the day before, right? That's its own unique thing. Amar Rav Kahana. Now we're going to have a whole next section is going to deal with the statement of Rav Kahana and a question that Rav Yosef has on Rav Kahana. And we're going to explain the question in one way. We're going to say that's really not a good question. And then Rav is going to come in, right? Abai is going to say that's not a good question. Rav is going to come and explain that question in a different way. Okay, so Amar Rav Kahana. And by the way, that's going to take us all the way to the next Mishnah. So this is a bit of a long section, which really only deals with this one thing about Rav Kahana. So Rav Kahana says, how do you know that imurei chagigat chamishasar shenifsalim belina? How do you know that when you eat the imurim, you burn the imurim on the altar, right? There's two parts of the meat, part that you eat and there's the part that you burn. So how do you know that when you take this chagigat chamishasar, which we already learned, the meat can be eaten for 2 days and a night, which means if you do it on the 15th, you can eat them on the 15th, 16th at night, and 16th during the day. At nighttime of the 16th, it's already disqualified. So Rav Kahana says, how do you know that the parts of this chagiga that you can eat until the nighttime of the 16th, how do you know that they're nifsalim belina? The parts that have to be burnt on the altar must be burnt that night. If you leave them beyond the 16th in the morning, right, beyond the 16th at night, which is basically ends at sunrise, how do you know that they're disqualified? Shenema lo yalin chelev chagi ad boker. Okay, I brought these verses on your sheet. Okay, so if you have the sheet, you can open them. It's Shmot Kaf Gimel Pasuk Yud Chet. Lo tizbacha chametz dam zivchi. Remember this? Don't slaughter with chametz. V'lo yalin chelev chagi ad boker. And don't leave the chalavim, the fats, which are the imurim. Right, the imurim include fats in some of the inner parts, until the morning. And chagi is the chagiga. So don't leave the parts that burn until the morning. But what does he say? How do you know what morning it's referring to? Maybe it means the morning of Tet Zayin, not the morning of Tet Vav, right? Which morning? Well, sorry. If we're on Tet Vav, it would be either the morning of Tet Zayin or the morning of Yud Zayin. How do we know which morning? So he says, Samech le Reshit. The next verse is, I mentioned this last time we learned this, Pasuk. Reshit b'kurad matcha tavi beit Hashem elokecha. Bring the first of your bikurim, because the whole context was here was chagim, the shalosh regalim. Lo tavashel avdi b'chalei pimo, and then it says don't cook milk and meat together. Okay, why these are all together? Whole other question, but not for our shir right now. But he says the word reshit comes immediately after. What does that come to teach you? That boker means boker rishon. Reshit means first. Oh, it means first morning, even though obviously the word reshit has nothing to do with this. But it happens to be pure juxtaposed. Therefore, we're going to say Reshit. L'meimer d'hai boker, boker rishon. It's to teach you that when they say, don't leave it till the morning, they mean the first morning, okay? The morning immediately after, which will be the morning of the 16th. Matkifla Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, and as I said, he's going to ask a question. Abai is going to say, that's not really a good question. And then Rav is going to say, this really is what he meant when he asked his question. And then we're not going to really understand his question. And it's going to take us a while till we understand what his question means, okay? So patience. So Matkifla Rav Yosef, he says, Tama the Katav Reshit. According to you, Rav Kahana, the whole reason we learned that it has to be burnt that day, it's that night, and you can't leave it over till the morning, is because it says the first in the next verse, right? Ha lo katav reshit. So what? If it didn't say reshit, what would you have thought? Havamina my boker sheni. You would have thought it meant the morning of the 17th. That would be really odd. Why would it be odd? Mi kamidi de basar ifsale meorta v'imurim ad safra. Doesn't make any sense because what did I say? The meat can be eaten till when? Till the night of the 17th, meaning as soon as night hits of the day of the 17th, the night before, it's already disqualified the meat. You can't eat it. So you're going to allow the imurim till that morning. In other words, why would you be allowed to burn the parts that have to be burned on the altar later than you can eat the meat? We would assume, right? The parts that burn on the altar are kind of going to God. So you would assume those have to be finished before right? We can still eat the meat maybe a little bit longer, but the stuff on the altar must be burnt before that. If you would think it would be logical that one would come before the other. So he says, how could it be? Because again, if you get 2 days to eat, so you sacrifice it on Tefav, you can eat it all of the 15th, that's Tefav. You can eat it all of the 16th. Night hits, you can't eat it anymore. But according to this, the psulina kicks in only after the second night, you would have all the way till the morning for the burning of the fats and the inner parts. That seems very odd, says Rav Yosef. So I'm a Rava, and so basically what he's saying is, he's not disagreeing with the halacha of Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana said you only have till the morning of the 16th, not the morning of the 17th. But he says your reason for a drasha is you don't need a drasha because it's obvious that we would never think that. You thought without reshit it would have meant the second morning. No way would it have meant the second morning because there's never a case where the imurim can be burnt longer than the actual eating could happen. Well, to that, Abai disagrees. He says, I'll prove to you that you actually do have a situation like that. Amarle Abaye, halamalo, why not? V'harei Pesach, look at the Korban Pesach. L'Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, he holds, de basar ifsalei mechatzot, v'imurim ad safra. Let's take the Korban Pesach. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, you don't have all night to eat the Korban Pesach. You only have till midnight. And till when can you burn the fats? Till the morning. So here you have a great case where the imurim actually get burnt longer. They have longer to get burnt than the meat can actually be eaten. So there you see, these two things are not connected. So he basically says, that's not a good question. So therefore, comes Rava to support Rav Yosef's question. Remember, Abai was a student of Rav Yosef, right? But he often questioned him, and here he's questioning him again. Comes Rav and he says, Rav Yosef hachi kashale. This is really what Rav Yosef's question is, and it's going to be a little hard to understand this right now. You'll have to wait till we read further. I'll try to explain it in a nutshell so you have an idea, but don't worry that you don't really get it because it really will only be comprehensible as we go on. The whole problem is his drasha. His drasha was, nobody disagrees with this halacha. Yes, it can only be burned, the imurim, till the next morning on Tet Zayin. But the question is, he proved it from Reshit, as if it had just said to the morning would have meant the second morning, not the first morning. So he comes and says, wait a minute, but we have this other drasha where to the Tana, it's obvious that stam, if it just appears as boker, it means the first morning without the word Reshit. So you don't need the word Reshit to prove what you're proving because here this Tana says if it just says morning, morning means next morning and not 2 mornings later. Okay, so therefore he says, I don't understand why you need this drasha of Kahana of Reshit when for the imurim, when it comes to eating the meat, okay, because the topic of the Tana is not the imurim, the parts that burn, it's the parts that we eat, but it shouldn't make a difference. When there it talks about till the morning, simple morning without anything with it, and as if there's no other reason to darshan it otherwise, which we're going to see, and the case is going to bring, there is reason to darshan it otherwise, but if it came without any other reason to darshan it any other way, you would assume till morning meant the immediate morning right after it and not the second morning. So why did you use Reshit to prove here it must be the first morning, which sounded like regular Stam Boker would mean second morning. So let's see that, and then we'll explain it again when we get to the end. Mahi. So as I said, this is going to take us all the way to the next Mishnah. So patience. Lo yalim min habasar asher tizbach be'erev bayom harishon laboker. Okay, so now we're quoting this verse. Don't leave over from the meat. Okay, this is not the verse we just said. Lo yalim chelev chagia boker. Now that was about the parts that burn on the altar. Now we're on the meat. The meat can't be left. This is pasuk from Sefer Dvarim, Perek Tetzayin, pasuk Daled. Don't leave over from the meat that you sacrifice ba'erev at night, bayom harishon laboker. Okay, or in the afternoon, let's say, right? Don't leave it over bayom harishon laboker, in the first day in the morning. So we don't know yet what this means. Now they're going to say, limed, what's the topic here? Limed al chagigat yudalet, shenechelet l'shnei yamim v'layla echad. This is going to be a very confusing braita. Forget about the fact that we didn't exactly understand Rav Yosef, the question that they say. Rav Yosef says, but now we're not going to really understand this braita right away, and the Gemara is going to have to explain it. So I'll try to explain it as simply as I can without getting into all the details yet that the Gemara is going to explain very soon. So right now they say this teaches you the chagiga that you bring on the 14th, ba'erev, right? Erev Pesach, the afternoon. That chagiga gets eaten for how long? This was what we saw in our Mishnah. The Mishnah said, Shnei Yamim v'layla echad, like a regular chagiga, as opposed to Ben Tema, who thought it was only the night of Pesach, just like the Korban Pesach. So he says, this verse teaches you, okay, we're going to have to see how, that you can eat the chagigat yudalet for 2 days and a night. Oh, now that as a classic Midrash Halacha type style, eno ela liyom v'layla. Maybe it's really for a day and night. Maybe it can only be eaten that day and that night. Kishuhu omer bayom harishon hare boker sheni amor. When it says bayom harishon, that implies, okay, bayom harishon laboker, that implies boker sheni. Oh, eno. Okay, so they're saying that's how you know, because it says bayom harishon laboker. That means 2 days, right? Not the first morning, but the second morning. Oh, but again, the Braita becomes very confusing. Oh, we know Ella Boker Rishon. Why are you saying it means Boker Sheni? Maybe it means Boker Rishon. Maybe it means the first morning. So what? Wait, but we know from somewhere else, which we're going to see in a minute, where we know this from. We know from somewhere else that the Chagiga gets eaten for 2 days. And if you want to say this one's only a day, right? That night and not 2 days. What do you do with this chagiga nechelet l'shnei yamim v'layla echad? Oh, chutz mizo. This chagigat yudalet is an exception to that rule. How did we know this? Kashu omer by this top. We'll see. Im neder o nedava. Okay, this is a verse by Yikra Zayin Tetzayin. I also brought it on the sheet. Im neder im nedava. I think I did right. Yeah. Im neder o nedava zevach korbano. B'yom HaKrivo, if you bring a voluntary offering to the temple, B'yom HaKrivo et zivcho yachel, eat it that day, Umi machorat, and the next day, Vanotar mimenu yachel, right? And whatever's left, right, you can eat the next day. After that, obviously you can't. Then it's called notar. Now, what does it say here? Ve'im neder o nedava. So the ve'im, they darshan to include something else, not just voluntary offerings. It must be including something else. What does it include? A chagiga. So now they say, if you want to suggest that maybe the chagigat yudalet can only be eaten that day and night and not 2 days, what are you going to do with this rashayim nederim nedava that comes to include a chagiga that gets eaten also 2 days? So we're going to say it's chutz mizo, right? That it includes all chagigas, but not this one. Okay, not the chagigat yudalet. Again, this is like what we saw before. Chagigat yudalet has different laws than a regular chagiga. Okay, so we still don't understand how this is connected to Rav Yosef's question, and we still don't really understand what this braita means, so don't worry if you're feeling a little bit confused. So now the Gemara is going to try to understand it. Amar Mar. Oh, and no, so now let's go. The first part we understood, which is, okay, let's go back to the beginning because they're going to start, I split this on the sheet into 3 stages of the braita. Okay, so the first stage, and you can see this on the sheet, the first stage is, we quote the verse. We say this teaches us chagigat arba'asar nechelet l'shnei yamim v'yom echad. It's really eaten for 2 days and a night. We're going to have to explain how we get to this from the verse. That we don't yet know. So then the Gemara says, maybe it's really yom v'layla. And when they say bayom harishon, right, they say, oh, because when it says bayom harishon, it means boker sheni. Then the Gemara said, oh, eno ela boker rishon, right? They establish that Bayom Rishon laboker means we're getting you 2 days. Okay, and not boker doesn't mean the next day. So, but then they immediately start questioning, oh, eno ella, right? Maybe it's boker rishon. So the Gemara is going to start with that and try to say, what we just said it's not. How are you saying it is? So let's read that. Amar Mar. Oh, eno ella boker rishon. So they're quoting that line after we just established that boker rishon mean, right? Bayom rishon baboker means skip 2 days, right? Not this, the morning immediately after, but the morning after that. Again, in this case, it's not going to be, right? In the case before we were talking about Chagigat Tevav, it would be Yud Zayin. Now we're starting on the 14th, Yud Daled, and we're going to say that takes you to Tet Zayin in the morning. That's what this verse is telling you. Okay, that the meat can be eaten till Tet Zayin in the morning. You basically, or actually, really, it's Tet Zayin at night. You basically have Yud Daled and Tevav to eat it, and you can't leave it over till the morning after. So now they say, Ha'amar kishuhu omer b'yom harishon laboker harei boker sheni amor. Didn't you just say that means the second morning? And then, oh, wait, no, Ella. So they say, okay. And then all of a sudden you're saying maybe it means the first morning. So I'm very confused. So hachi kamar, what the Gemara explains is this is what they mean to say. Oh, eino Ella b'shtei chagigot hakatuv medaber. Maybe the topic, and this I put a whole chart to show, right? Originally, they think the whole thing's talking about Chagigat Yudalid, and it's telling you that you can't eat Chagigat Yudalid, right? Bayom Harishon laboker makes you Bayom Harishon, and laboker, that's kind of 2 days, okay? Each one refers to a day. But now they're saying maybe that verse is referring to 2 Chagigot. Maybe it's combining Chagigat Yudalid and Chagigat Tevav. And what it's saying is, Zolibokra v'Zolibokra. It's basically saying, Ba'erev is the one you give on Erev Pesach, which is Yudalid. Bayom Harishon is the one you give on the first day of Pesach. And then laboker means each one has its own boker, meaning each one can only be eaten for 1 day till the next morning. And maybe Bayom Harishon laboker doesn't mean we're having Bayom Harishon and then another boker. No, Bayom Harishon is referring to the sacrifice and not to when it can be eaten. And baboker is referring, and then we read the pasuk like this: Ba'erev laboker and Bayom Harishon laboker. Each sacrifice gets till the next morning, meaning you can only eat it that night. And then, right? So that's their suggestion right now. So then they say in Hadar Amar, that's why the Gemara, the Braita then continues and says, Ela dekaimalam, but we know the Chagiga nechelet l'shnei yamim v'layla echad. Im kenim nederim nidava b'mai. If you say that, then the drasha that we know to be the case of im nederim nidava that comes to say that can be eaten for 2 days includes a chagiga that can also be eaten for 2 days. Well, you've left no chagiga here, because if you say chagigat Yudalit is eaten that day only, that night, and you say chagigat tevav, well, chagigat tevav is the same as all chagigot of all holidays. So now there's no chagiga that you're going to say can be eaten for 2 days, and that doesn't match this that we know to be true. That im nederim nidava comes to include a korban chagiga. So therefore, so again, let's keep reading the question. I chagigat Yudalit haktiv bayom v'layla. We've just proven, according to the reading in the second stage here, is that both of them can only be eaten 1 day, and then that drasha is left for nothing, and that can't be because we know there's a drasha like that. So therefore, the third shlav of the Gemara is to say, of the Braita, is to say, Elahai l'chagigat tevav. The pasukim nederim nidava comes to tell you all regular korbanot chagiga can be eaten for 2 days and a night. Now, remember where we started. We want to prove also Chagigat Yudalit can be eaten for 2 days and a night, and not only for 1 day against Ben Tema, right? So, back to our verse, Lo Yalin Chelev, right? I'm sorry, Lo Yalin Mina Basar Shetizbach Ba'erev Bayom Harishon Baboker. We're almost at the end of this section. This is all coming from Chagigat Yudalit. So again, Limera Chagigat Yudalit Shnechelet L'Shnei Yamim V'Layla Echad. Now, how did they get that from here? Tama, and here comes the big clincher. Tama dichtiv bayom harishon laboker. How did they get to this drasha that we're talking about 2 days? Because it said on the first day to the morning. So first day is 1 day, morning is the next day. Okay? Now, what does that imply? What if it just said boker and it didn't say yom harishon? What would it be? It would be immediately the next morning. Only because it says bayom harishon laboker do we assume it just skips a day and we get to 2 days. So therefore, right? Ha kol hecha. So here, Tama dichti bayom harishon laboker demai boker boker sheni. Since it said bayom harishon on the first day, and then it said morning. Morning must mean upcoming day. But ha kol hecha dichti boker stama boker rishon. But that implies that what? If it just said boker, what would we have assumed? We would have assumed the immediate morning following, not 2 days later, right? We wouldn't have assumed that. And therefore, Afagav, even though it doesn't say Reshit, go back to Rav Kahana. What did he say? Because it says Reshit in the verse about the Imurim, we learn it when it says Ad Boker, Lo Yaliv Chelev Chagi Ad Boker, Reshit. Oh, it means Boker Rishon. But he says to Rav Kahana, and this is the way Rav understands Rav Yosef's question. Again, this is a very complicated way to say this, but it's really very simple. He says, according to that whole drasha over there in the Tana of the Braita, thought that Stam Boker would be the immediate morning after. It wouldn't be Boker Sheni. So why did he need a drasha of Reshit to tell you Boker is Boker Sheni? There it just said Boker simply. Boker there must have meant Boker Rishon, and you don't need this drasha of Reshit. And that's where we end. We don't have an answer to the question against Rav Kahana. It's a pretty good question, right? Because you would assume Boker must mean till the morning, right? If you say till the morning, you obviously don't mean 2 mornings. And only here, because it says Bayom Rishon Boker, they jump an extra day. Okay, so that was Rav Yosef's question. That's how Rava understood Rav Yosef's question against Rav Kahana. Okay, new Mishnah. This is a very fascinating topic. We're only going to touch upon it today, and we really don't have a lot of time left, so we're going to go through it pretty quickly, but no worries, because this is going to be our topic for the next few days, about someone who makes a mistake while they're trying to do a mitzvah. It's a great topic. In fact, Shirin Kamutal and Daphne Shalahen talk about it this week. It'll come out on Facebook tonight and on the site tomorrow, and they go in depth into some of the sugyot that come up in the next few days. About this whole topic of someone, it's a great topic, someone who accidentally is Machal Shabbos while trying to do a mitzvah. And which mitzvah? Korban Pesach. So a Pesach, sheshakato shelo lishma. You're about to slaughter your Korban Pesach, and accidentally you're so excited about the mitzvah and you're so focused on it, and all of a sudden your mind wanders, and you start saying, I'm doing this for a Korban Shlamim. Okay, we already said what happens. It's disqualified. If it's disqualified, well, then you did nothing, and now you slaughtered an animal on Shabbat. You transgressed Shabbat. So chayav alav chatat. You have to bring a sin offering, like anyone who unwittingly did a sin on Shabbat. Ushar kol hazbachim sheshachatan l'shem Pesach. Right. Obviously, we're standing on Yud Daled that fell on Shabbat. Right. It's so great that this year it comes out this way, and we have so much that we've learned about Yud Daled that falls on Shabbat. Ushar kol hazbachim. What if you take any other sacrifice that you're not supposed to bring on Shabbat? Okay, because it's not right. You're not allowed to bring a random korban on Shabbat, but you take them and shachatan l'shem Pesach. You take an animal that was designated, let's say, for chatat, and now you slaughter it. Or let's say not a chatat, let's say a shlamim, and you slaughter it now as a Pesach. If it's an animal like cattle that couldn't have been brought, remember, or it's a female, or something that could never have been brought as Pesach in the first place, well, you should have paid attention and you should have realized and shouldn't have thought, oh, I'm slaughtering this for my Korban Pesach. It's not, right? That's not a good mistake to make. So you're going to be obligated. But if it's an animal that could have been slaughtered, like a sheep or a lamb that was in its first year, that was male, all those things, then Rabbi Eliezer mechayev chatat. So Rabbi Eliezer says, you're still, okay, you messed up. It's a problem. Rabbi Yoshua potel. Rabbi Yoshua says no. Why? Because when you take an animal, you take a regular sacrifice, not a Pesach, and you slaughter it. That's why I said not a chatat, because chatat is in the same category as Pesach. If you do it shelo lishma, it's disqualified. All other sacrifices that you do lo lishma are not disqualified. You didn't fulfill your obligation, but they're not disqualified. So you actually brought a korban. That's a mitzvah. So you were to'eh while doing a mitzvah, and you actually did a mitzvah. So therefore, you're exempt from the korban chatat. Okay, that's a fascinating thing. You're trying to do a mitzvah. You made a mistake. You did a mitzvah, though. It's just not the mitzvah you're supposed to do. And you weren't supposed to do it on Shabbos, but you're exempt. Amar le Rabbi Eliezer. He says, something absurd comes out of what you're saying. Okay, again, we have this conversation like in the previous Mishnah. If the Pesach, you bring a Pesach and you do it for the right reason, it's obviously allowed. And yet, when you decide to do it as a chatat, let's say by accident, you're chayav, you're obligated. So zvachim, if you would bring the shlamim on Shabbat, you're not allowed to do that because it's Shabbat. And yet, you're going to say all of a sudden, Rabbi Yoshua, just because, right, this sacrifice that you can't even bring on Shabbat, now you bring it and you bring it for the wrong reason, and now all of a sudden you're going to be exempt. Like changing the name is going to give you an exemption when keeping it for its original purpose is not. That seems absurd. Amar lo Rabbi Yoshua lo, im amarta b'Pesach sheshina b'davar ha'asur. On Pesach, you tried to do it as a shlamim, let's say, and that's forbidden. But tomar b'zbachim sheshina b'davar mutar. But this korban shlamim that you decide to sacrifice as a Pesach, You were trying to do something that you could actually do today. You can actually do a Pesach. Now, it happens you messed up. And you thought, right, you took a shlamim. You took an animal that was designated for the wrong korban. But you tried to do something that was actually permitted for today. That's why you're exempt. Because you were trying to do korban Pesach. Amar le Rabbi Eliezer. Wait a minute. The parts that get burned, like the korban tamid, you burn on the altar, and things that you have to, right, communal offerings will prove you're wrong. Shehem mutarim lishman, because these are allowed to be brought as a tamid. Vashochet lishman, but if you slaughter them, this is confusing. It should be shalo lishman, okay? Lishman means for in the name of other sacrifice. Let's say you take an animal designated for korban tamid, and you try to slaughter it on Shabbat for the purposes of a shlamim. You're chayav. So that's going to disprove what you just said. Amar le Rabbi Yeshua lo. No, that's different than the Pesach. Why? If you bring a korban tamid with some other sacrifice, that's not the same as bringing a korban Pesach, thinking you're bringing a korban Pesach with the wrong animal. Why? There's a big difference between tamid and Pesach. What's the difference? There's a limit to how many korbanot tamid you could bring. One, right? How many musafim? One, right? There's certain musafim. You bring that. It's numbered. How many extra sacrifices you're allowed to bring on that day? But tomorrow, but Pesach, but Pesach, we can bring tons of korbanot, right? Everyone brings a Pesach to the. Therefore, we're going to be more lenient when it comes to allowing some mistake because you were trying to bring it as a Pesach, right? Whereas trying to bring an extra korban musaf or korban tamid, that's ridiculous, right? There's a limit. Rabbi Meir Omer, Afa shochet l'shem u'mu'et tzibur patur. He has a whole different approach. He has a very lenient approach about this whole thing. He says you were trying to do a mitzvah. I don't care that. It was imuret tzibur, even imuret tzibur, you're going to be exempt because even though you really didn't do anything, still, I'm going to exempt you. Okay, we'll get more into these opinions as we go on. Okay, last part of the Mishnah. Again, this is all the psulim we saw before. You shechted for people who can't eat it. You shechted for people who are all uncircumcised, etc., all those categories. Again, you're going to be obligated. You made a mistake, right? You should have known that you can't do that. But lo ochlav v'shelo lo ochlav, which remember is not disqualified. Liminuyav v'shelo liminuyav, if you include people who can and can't, right? Lemulim v'alarilim, litzmeim v'litorim, then you're exempt, patur, because you were doing, right? That's actually a fine korban. Shachatov nimtza ba'almum. Let's say you slaughter it and then you realize it was blemished. Chayav. Why are you chayav again? This is just interesting in terms of what were you supposed to be careful about? You should have checked the animal that it was blemished. It was something you could have noticed before. So if you slaughter it and now it turns out it wasn't good for a korban and you slaughtered on Shabbat, you're obligated. But oftentimes you slaughter an animal and you see inside that the animal had something that you never would have noticed until you opened it. And now it's a treifa. It was sick and it's no good. So you're patur because you couldn't have known that before. So even though in the end you slaughtered something on Shabbat that can't be a korban, it's not your fault. Likewise, you're going to be exempt in the following case. You slaughter it thinking you have people in your group, and those people, while you're slaughtering it, decide they're leaving and they're going to another group, and you now sacrificed it for nobody. Or all the owners of your sacrifice died, okay? They had a car accident on the way to the Beit HaMikdash, okay? And they all died. Or they all became disqualified, something, they were all sitting together and sheretz jumped around and touched them all, or, something happened, or someone died and they all became tamei met. You didn't know that at the time, so you were fine. It was just something happened. In the end, again, your sacrifice is disqualified, but it's not your fault. So again, there's so much in this Mishnah. We're going to get into it more in the Gemara. I'll stop here for now and pick up from here tomorrow. Shavua tov.